Snow fell in heavy sheets across Maplewood Cemetery, blanketing the rows of headstones in pristine white. Yet, despite the bitter cold, a massive German shepherd lay motionless atop a small, fresh grave. His once gleaming coat was matted with ice, his powerful frame visibly thinner than it should have been. For 17 days, Silver had refused to move from Sophie Miller's final resting place. For 17 days, he had rejected all food offered by concerned visitors. His eyes, once alert and protective, now stared vacantly at the small headstone as if waiting for something impossible. Through the thickening blizzard, a solitary figure trudged toward the grave, shoulders hunched against the biting wind. It wasn't the first person who had tried to coax the loyal dog away, but something about this silhouette was different, more determined, more desperate. As the figure drew closer, Silver's ears twitched slightly, the only indication he was still alive in the punishing cold. She knew this would happen. A woman's voice cracked, barely audible above the howling wind. "Somehow my little girl knew you'd never leave her." The words hung in the frigid air alongside a memory that seemed to float between them, a small voice whispering, "Promise me you'll love others like you loved me, Silver. Promise me you won't stop when I'm gone." How had it come to this? How had a former police dog deemed too damaged for service and a 5-year-old girl who rarely spoke formed a bond so powerful it defied death itself? The answer lay buried beneath months of struggle, joy, heartbreak, and a love that had transformed not just 2 souls but an entire community. And what would happen next would challenge everything the town of Maplewood thought they understood about loyalty, grief, and the mysterious connection between a child and her faithful guardian. What no one yet realized was that Silver's vigil was about to change them all forever. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. Sophie Miller wasn't like other 5-year-olds in Maplewood. Betsant, born with moderate autism, her world existed largely in silence. Where other children babbled and played, Sophie observed with watchful eyes, her thoughts locked behind a barrier that seemed impenetrable to those around her. Even simple interactions, a morning greeting, a request for breakfast, remained frustratingly beyond reach. Her parents had tried everything: specialized therapists, 3 times weekly sensory integration programs, and cutting-edge communication devices. Yet Sophie remained largely unreachable, her beautiful brown eyes tracking the world without fully participating in it. At school, teachers labeled her severely limited in social engagement potential. In clinical language that couldn't capture the bright intelligence her parents glimpsed in quiet moments at home, when Sophie would arrange her toys in patterns of startling complexity. Silver's journey to the Miller family had been equally challenging. The powerful German Shepherd had once been the pride of Maplewood Police Department's K-9 unit, with an impeccable record of tracking missing persons and apprehending suspects. But that career ended abruptly during a hostage situation gone wrong. Taking a bullet meant for his handler, Silver sustained damage to his left hind leg and developed an unpredictable wariness around strangers that made him unsuitable for continued service. His handler, devastated but unable to care for a special needs animal, surrendered him to the county shelter. After 3 months with no adoption interest, Silver's name appeared on the euthanasia list, his imposing size and distant demeanor deterring potential families from looking beyond his scarred exterior. The Miller household itself was a battlefield of competing philosophies even before Silver's arrival. Dr. James Miller ran the town's busiest veterinary clinic with a reputation for taking on cases others considered hopeless. He believed deeply in the healing connection between animals and humans, an approach his wife found frustratingly unscientific. Dr. Rebecca Miller, a respected child psychologist specializing in developmental disorders, advocated evidence-based therapeutic interventions for Sophie. Their disagreements about their daughter's care had grown from professional differences into personal rifts, their once loving partnership giving way to tense conversations held in whispers behind closed doors. Their sprawling farmhouse at the edge of town, once purchased as a dream home, had become a quiet monument to their shared heartbreak, each retreat to separate corners of the house, widening the distance between them. Dr. James Miller's day at Maplewood Veterinary Clinic had been particularly draining. 3 emergency surgeries and a reluctant euthanasia for a beloved family pet with terminal cancer. He should have headed straight home, but something compelled him to make the detour he'd been avoiding. The county animal shelter's latest email had been clear. The police dog he'd treated after the shooting was out of chances. As James pulled into the shelter's gravel parking lot, he questioned his own judgment. Rebecca would see this as another battle in their ongoing war over Sophie's treatment, but he couldn't shake the memory of the dignified shepherd who'd saved his handler's life at tremendous personal cost. The shelter smelled of industrial disinfectant and lingering animal fear. Marjorie, the aging shelter director, greeted him with surprise. "He's scheduled for tomorrow morning, James." "Nothing personal, we're just out of space and nobody wants a damaged police dog." She led him through rows of hopeful barking to a kennel at the far end. Unlike the other dogs frantically seeking attention, Silver sat motionless in the corner, his amber eyes registering James's presence without reaction. His once glossy coat had dulled during his months of confinement, and the surgical scar along his left hind leg remained prominent. "Has he shown aggression?" James asked, kneeling slowly by the cage door. "Not exactly," Marjorie sighed, "but he's shut down. He won't engage with potential adopters. The department psychologist called it attachment injury. He's lost his purpose and his handler in one go. Frankly, it might be kinder to let him go than leave him like this." James wasn't sure what made him sign the papers. Perhaps it was professional obligation to an animal he'd saved once before, or maybe it was recognition of something in those distant eyes that reminded him of Sophie intelligence trapped behind barriers of trauma. Either way, an hour later, Silver was reluctantly following him to his truck, every step communicating the dog's suspicion that this change was temporary at best. The argument with Rebecca unfolded exactly as he'd anticipated. "You brought home a physically damaged former police dog without consulting me." Her voice remained controlled. They'd both learned to fight quietly so Sophie wouldn't be disturbed. "Have you lost your mind, James? Sophie needs stability and safety, not some unpredictable animal with PTSD." "He needs a chance, Rebecca, just like Sophie needs chances we're not giving her." James's voice had that stubborn quality that always heightened tension between them. "The conventional approaches aren't working. We've tried your way for 3 years. So this is about our daughter now, not just another of your rescue projects?" Rebecca's professional composure slipped. "A traumatized police dog isn't a therapy animal, James. You're a vet, not a psychiatrist." Silver remained in the mudroom that night, refusing the comfortable bed James had purchased, instead positioning himself with a clear view of both the front door and the hallway leading to the family bedrooms. He accepted water, but wouldn't touch the premium food. James offered a concerning but not unexpected response to yet another disruption in his life. The moment that changed everything happened the following morning. James had left for an early surgery, and Rebecca was preparing Sophie's carefully structured breakfast cut into precise squares, nothing touching on the plate when she heard an unfamiliar sound. A small, hesitant-voiced dog. Rebecca froze, afraid to move. In the doorway stood Sophie, her usual blank expression replaced with something like curiosity. Silver stood beside her, his massive frame making her appear even tinier than her small-for-age stature. Rebecca's heart hammered against her ribs. The dog was close enough to hurt Sophie with a single movement, but something in Silver's posture communicated absolute gentleness. "Sophie?" Rebecca whispered, afraid to break the spell. "What did you say, sweetheart?" "Dog," Sophie repeated, her hand hovering inches from Silver's scarred flank. Then, to Rebecca's astonishment, Sophie's fingers made contact with the shepherd's fur. It was the first time Sophie had voluntarily touched anything living besides her parents, and even those contacts were infrequent and often rebuffed. Silver remained perfectly still, as if understanding the significance of this moment. When Sophie's hand withdrew, he lowered himself to the floor, head on paws, maintaining a respectful distance while keeping her in his sight. The calculated deliberateness of his movements suggested training beyond standard police work. By the time James returned that evening, Rebecca's opposition had softened into cautious observation. She said, "Dog James," twice, and she touched him. The significance needed no elaboration between them. Sophie's therapist had been trying to elicit voluntary touch for years. Over the following weeks, Silver's presence catalyzed changes nobody had dared hope for. Sophie began using short phrases around him: "Silver come, Silver stay," communicating with purpose rather than necessity for the first time in her life. She would sit beside him for hours, sometimes reading aloud from picture books in her halting voice, sometimes simply resting against his steady warmth. As Silver's physical condition improved under James's care, his demeanor transformed as well. The distant, traumatized animal from the shelter emerged as a vigilant but gentle protector who seemed to anticipate Sophie's needs with uncanny precision. Before meltdowns could fully manifest, Silver would guide Sophie to quiet corners, using his body to create a barrier between her and overwhelming stimuli. He learned to retrieve her noise-canceling headphones when environmental sounds became too much, and slept each night outside her bedroom door. Not everyone shared the Millers' growing appreciation for the bond between girl and dog. Mrs. Abernathy next door complained about keeping a police-attacked dog in a residential neighborhood, while Sophie's speech therapist expressed concern that Sophie might use Silver as a substitute for human interaction. Principal Henderson from Maplewood Elementary requested a meeting to discuss significant liability concerns. Should Sophie ever attend mainstream classes with a service animal, particularly one without proper certification? Yet, for the first time in years, the Millers found themselves united by cautious hope. One evening, after Sophie had fallen asleep following her longest verbal exchange yet, telling Silver about the planets in halting but complete sentences, Rebecca reached for James's hand across the kitchen table. "I'm still worried," she admitted, "but I can't argue with results. Whatever's happening between them, it's reaching her in ways nothing else has." James squeezed her fingers, the gesture bridging months of distance. "I think they recognize something in each other. Both of them carrying wounds nobody can see." Principal Henderson's office smelled of furniture polish and institutional coffee. Framed education credentials lined the walls, and a ceramic apple paperweight emblazoned with "World's Best Principal" anchored a stack of permission forms. Sophie sat quietly between her parents, Silver lying at her feet in a custom vest James had ordered, reading Medical Support Animal in Training. Rebecca had spent hours preparing Sophie for this meeting, using social stories and picture schedules to make the unfamiliar process less threatening. "While I appreciate the progress you've described," Henderson began, his fingers forming a steeple beneath his chin, "Maplewood Elementary has standards and protocols regarding service animals. Silver lacks certification from a recognized training program, and his history as a police dog raises serious concerns." "He's been extensively retrained," James countered. "And the Americans with Disabilities Act doesn't actually require certification for service animals." "True," Henderson conceded, "but we have other students to consider. Parents have already expressed concerns about a former police dog on campus, especially one with a history of injury and a violent incident." "Silver was the victim of that violence," Rebecca interjected, surprising James with her defense. "And more importantly, he's the first intervention that's genuinely helped our daughter." As if understanding he was the subject of discussion, Silver raised his head, ears forward in alert attention. Sophie's hand immediately found his fur, a self-soothing gesture that had replaced her former rocking and head tapping. "May I demonstrate?" Sophie's small voice startled everyone in the room. They were the first words she'd spoken since entering the building. Henderson recovered quickly. "Of course, Sophie." With deliberate movements, Sophie stood and walked to the window overlooking the playground where children swarmed over colorful equipment. Previously, such chaotic motion and noise would have overwhelmed her. She turned to Silver and gave a subtle hand signal James hadn't taught her. The shepherd rose and positioned himself between Sophie and the window, creating a buffer that allowed her to observe without becoming overstimulated. "He helps me see," Sophie explained in her halting way. The world is too bright, too loud. Silver makes it quieter. The simple eloquence from a child who 6 months ago barely spoke left the room in momentary silence. Henderson's expression softened, but administrative concerns quickly resurfaced. I appreciate the demonstration, Sophie, but we have the special education classroom as an accommodation. Segregating my daughter isn't an accommodation, Rebecca interrupted, her professional demeanor giving way to maternal advocacy. It's exclusion. Sophie deserves the least restrictive environment appropriate for her education, as guaranteed by federal law. The meeting ended in stalemate, with Henderson promising to consult the school board. The real battle erupted 2 weeks later at the public board meeting, where parents divided into factions supporting or opposing Silver's presence. Mrs. Abernathy had organized concerned parents, distributing flyers about police dog attack statistics. Countering them were parents of children with various disabilities, arguing that Sophie's case could set an important precedent for inclusion. Through it all, Sophie sat with Silver, her small fingers buried in his fur, watching with wide eyes as adults argued passionately about her future. When the board chairman finally asked if anyone had additional comments before the vote, Sophie stood. The room fell silent as she made her way to the microphone, Silver a steady presence beside her. "Silver helps me be brave," she said, each word carefully formed. "Please let me be brave at school, too." The board voted 4-3 to allow a trial period with quarterly reviews and additional safety protocols. It should have been a moment of triumph, but life had other plans. The bruises appeared the following week, small purple blooms on Sophie's pale arms and legs. Rebecca initially attributed them to increased physical activity now that Sophie was attending school part-time with Silver. But when a nosebleed during dinner wouldn't stop, parental instinct overrode rational explanation. The pediatrician's face grew grave as he examined Sophie's gums and ordered immediate blood work. The oncology department at Children's Memorial Hospital became their new battlefield. Words like acute lymphoblastic leukemia and aggressive treatment protocol bombarded them from all sides. The prognosis was cautiously optimistic. Children typically responded well to treatment, but Dr. Winter's expression grew serious when discussing immediate lifestyle changes. "I understand how important the dog has become," she explained, "but during chemotherapy, Sophie's immune system will be severely compromised. Any source of potential infection must be eliminated, including pets." Rebecca nodded automatically, medical reason aligning with her original instincts about having a dog. James's face hardened. "Silver is meticulously groomed and regularly examined," he argued. "The psychological trauma of separation could be more immediately damaging than any theoretical infection risk." "This isn't theoretical, James," Rebecca exploded in the hospital hallway. "Our daughter has cancer. Cancer. And you're still putting your attachment to that dog above medical advice?" "I'm putting Sophie's emotional well-being on equal footing with her physical treatment," James shot back. "You've seen how Silver grounds her, how he's the only thing that makes her feel safe in unfamiliar environments. And now you want to rip away her main support during the most frightening experience of her life?" Their argument echoed down the sterile corridor until a small voice stopped them cold. "Don't take Silver away." Sophie stood in her doorway, hospital gown hanging from her thin shoulders. "Please, Mommy, he helps me brave." The simple plea accomplished what hours of adult argument couldn't. Rebecca knelt before her daughter, struggling to maintain composure. "The doctors are worried he might make you sick, sweetheart." Sophie shook her head with surprising conviction. "Silver keeps me safe. He knows I'm sick." The clarity in her voice was striking longer sentences than she typically managed, especially under stress. A compromise emerged through consultation with Dr. Margaret Watson, an oncologist with experience in pediatric therapy animal programs. Silver would undergo specialized bathing protocols before visits. He would be restricted to certain areas of the hospital during specific phases of treatment. And most importantly, Silver would receive additional training as a proper medical support animal, legitimizing the role he'd already assumed in Sophie's life. As they established this uneasy truce, none of them recognized they had reached the point of no return, a juncture where Sophie's life, Silver's purpose, and their family's future converged and transformed entirely. The battle for school inclusion now seemed trivial compared to the war they were about to wage against an enemy multiplying inside Sophie's small body. The oncology ward at Children's Memorial Hospital was a world defined by paradox. Cheerful murals of jungle animals adorned walls where life and death battles were fought daily. The medical professionals maintained bright smiles while delivering news that shattered families. And children's laughter somehow coexisted with the mechanical hum of chemotherapy pumps. When Silver first padded through these contradictions, an unprecedented exception to hospital policy, the reactions ranged from administrative horror to desperate curiosity. Nurses who had initially voiced the strongest objections became his most ardent advocates after witnessing his effect on Sophie during her first chemotherapy session. She sat absolutely still for the 2-hour infusion, a miracle for a child with sensory processing challenges, but with one hand connected to the IV and the other buried in Silver's fur. When nausea followed hours later, Silver lay beside her hospital bed, his steady presence a constant as everything else in Sophie's world tilted and spun. He seemed to sense the cycles of her discomfort, alerting nurses with a soft whine minutes before Sophie herself showed signs of distress. After the third such incident, Dr. Watson began documenting these interventions with clinical interest. "It's not unheard of for dogs to detect biochemical changes," she explained to Rebecca, who watched with a mixture of amazement and lingering skepticism. "Some can signal seizures before they occur. Others have shown ability to detect certain cancers through scent. What's remarkable here is Silver's responsiveness to Sophie's specific needs." The hospital's strict visitation policies bent further as other young patients began asking to meet the cancer-fighting dog. Parents who had spent weeks trying to coax smiles from their suffering children reported the first genuine laughter during Silver's brief visits. A 10-year-old boy who had refused physical therapy after a tumor removal surgery found motivation to walk when permitted to hold Silver's leash for short distances. Dr. Watson compiled these observations alongside Sophie's case notes, building evidence for a formal therapy dog program. James, who had initially brought Silver to the hospital as simply Sophie's emotional support, found himself documenting these interactions with meticulous care. His veterinary training gave him insight into subtle canine behaviors most observers missed: how Silver modulated his energy based on each child's condition, how he positioned himself to provide physical support without interfering with medical equipment, and most remarkably, how he seemed to prioritize children experiencing the greatest distress, even when Sophie wasn't present. "He's been repurposed," James explained to Dr. Watson as they watched Silver gently rest his head on the lap of a newly admitted patient. "Police dogs are trained to detect subtle environmental changes and respond to human distress. Silver's just applying those skills in a different context." Rebecca, whose initial reluctance had given way to cautious acceptance, found herself increasingly moved by Silver's interventions with Sophie. During her daughter's most difficult nights, when medication side effects left her alternately burning with fever or shaking with chills, Silver maintained constant vigil. When hospital protocol would have required him to leave overnight, Rebecca found herself advocating for an exception. "His presence reduces her anxiety medication requirements by nearly 30%, she argued, bringing her professional credentials to bear on Sophie's behalf. "That's not emotional speculation, it's measurable medical benefit." Beyond the hospital walls, Sophie's story began generating wider attention. The local newspaper ran a feature titled "Four Paws Against Cancer: How a Police Dog Found New Purpose." The article, accompanied by a photograph of Silver resting his head on Sophie's hospital bed, caught the community's imagination. Letters poured in from families facing similar challenges with special needs children, asking how they might find their own Silver. What began as isolated media interest evolved into something more structured when Rebecca, drawing on her background in child psychology, helped organize a support group for parents navigating dual challenges: children with developmental differences facing serious medical conditions. The first meeting, held in the hospital's family room, drew 7 families. By the third month, they'd outgrown the space and moved to the community center. James found himself fielding questions from veterinarians and animal behaviorists across the state, all interested in Silver's remarkable adaptability. "It challenges our understanding of working dog specialization," he explained during a presentation at the state veterinary conference. Silver wasn't formally retrained for therapy work. He essentially reprogrammed himself based on Sophie's needs. The video footage he shared Silver alerting nurses to Sophie's increasing distress, guiding her through overwhelming hospital environments, providing deep pressure during anxiety episodes, prompted discussions about more intentional crossover training between police dogs and therapy animals. Throughout these professional developments, Thomas Harrison observed from afar. The 78-year-old widower lived in the house directly adjacent to the Miller property, where his living room window provided a clear view of their backyard. He had watched with initial alarm when the massive German Shepherd arrived, but something about the dog's interactions with the quiet little girl next door stirred memories of his late wife, with a special education teacher who had believed deeply in reaching children others had written off. On days when Sophie was strong enough to come home between treatments, Thomas would watch her and Silver in the yard. The girl who neighbors had described as locked in her own world. Now moved with purpose, tossing balls for Silver to retrieve or reading books aloud while he lay beside her on a blanket. One particularly difficult afternoon, when Sophie returned from treatment too weak to walk from the car, Thomas watched Silver position himself beside her, allowing the child to use his sturdy frame for support as she made her way slowly to the porch swing. Without announcing his intentions, Thomas began leaving small gifts on the Miller's porch: homemade dog biscuits, a handcrafted wooden puzzle for Sophie, fresh vegetables from his garden. When James finally caught him in the act, Thomas shrugged off gratitude with embarrassment. "My Eleanor would have loved that dog," he said simply. "She always said animals reach places in children that people can't." As Sophie's treatment progressed through its brutal cycles, her school created an unprecedented accommodation. On Silver Fridays, when Sophie's blood counts were high enough to allow brief attendance, a special corner of the classroom was designated for her and Silver. The arrangement, initially viewed as disruptive, proved beneficial beyond expectation. Students who had been hesitant around Sophie now approached with curiosity about Silver, creating social opportunities that had previously seemed impossible. "He's a bridge," Sophie's teacher explained during a parent-teacher conference. "The other children might not know how to connect with Sophie directly, but they all want to connect with Silver. And Sophie, remarkably, is becoming their guide to understanding him." Even as these external successes accumulated, the private reality remained challenging. Sophie's physical condition fluctuated dramatically with treatment phases. Weeks of relative stability would be followed by hospitalizations for neutropenic fever or infection. Through it all, Silver's behavior evolved with almost preternatural attunement to her changing needs, from energetic playmate during good days to motionless comfort during her worst suffering. What none of the adults recognized, however, was Sophie's growing awareness of her own prognosis. Children often understand more than adults credit, and Sophie's natural observational skills, heightened by her neurodiversity, allowed her to interpret the subtle shifts in medical conversations, the carefully controlled expressions when lab results were discussed, the hushed consultations between her parents and doctors in hallways they thought were private. During her 5th month of treatment, when her hair had long since fallen out and her once robust appetite had dwindled to occasional interest in popsicles, Sophie began making recordings. The idea originated with Hannah, a kind-hearted nurse who brought a tablet to Sophie's bedside during a difficult night when Silver was absent for his required grooming. "Sometimes when I miss my kids while working overnight, they send me videos," Hannah explained. "Would you like to make one for Silver until he comes back tomorrow?" The suggestion sparked something unexpected in Sophie. With Hannah's help, she recorded a brief message: "Silver, I'm being brave until you come back." Upon Silver's return, Sophie delighted in playing the recording, watching his ears perk forward at the sound of her voice. From that point forward, recording messages became a regular activity, a project that seemed to energize Sophie even on difficult days. Neither Hannah nor Sophie's parents realized she was creating these messages with a specific purpose, preserving parts of herself against a future she somehow understood might arrive. She recorded instructions for Silver. Remember to sit when someone new comes to the house. And don't pull on the leash when you walk with Daddy. She recorded memories. Remember when we found that big frog in the backyard and you scared it away? Most significantly, she recorded feelings. You're the best dog in the whole world, Silver. You make everything not so scary. During this same period, with assistance from Hannah during a night when both her parents had gone home to shower and rest, Sophie wrote a letter. Her handwriting was shaky from medication side effects, but the message was clear. Dear Mommy and Daddy, when I have to go away, Silver will be sad. Please don't let him be alone. He needs to help other kids like me. He is good at helping. Don't be mad at each other. I love you both. Love, Sophie. Hannah, recognizing the significance of this communication, gently asked Sophie if she wanted to give the letter to her parents now. Not yet, Sophie said with unexpected firmness. Put it in my special box. For later. The letter went into the decorated shoebox under Sophie's hospital bed, where she kept treasured drawings from classmates and Silver's first worn-out collar. Neither Hannah nor Sophie could have predicted how crucial this hidden message would become. While Sophie prepared privately for possibilities the adults refused to acknowledge, James was scientifically documenting Silver's interventions, creating a formal case study of animal-assisted therapy for children with dual diagnoses. Rebecca, whose professional skepticism had evolved into cautious advocacy, contributed psychological assessments of Sophie's cognitive and emotional development during treatment. Their shared project bridged some of the distance that had grown between them, providing common purpose beyond the grinding routine of hospital visits and medication management. After months of careful observation, Rebecca found herself revising long-held professional positions. I've always believed in evidence-based interventions, she admitted to James one evening as they reviewed footage of Silver guiding Sophie through a particularly difficult procedure. But we don't always have evidence for things that are new or rare. Sometimes the evidence has to be created through careful observation of exceptional cases. Like Sophie and Silver, James said quietly. Rebecca nodded. I was wrong to dismiss your intuition about bringing him home. You saw a possibility I couldn't. This reconciliation between professional perspectives mirrored the personal one developing between them, a slow rebuilding of partnership forged in the crucible of their daughter's illness. Illness, where they had once been divided by competing approaches to Sophie's autism, they were now united by the more immediate battle for her physical survival and quality of life. Meanwhile, Sophie continued recording messages and training Silver for a future only she seemed to fully anticipate. She taught him to retrieve specific items, her headphones, favorite blanket, certain toys, using consistent command words that her parents assumed were simply part of their ongoing bond. More puzzling were the occasions they discovered Sophie seemingly instructing Silver to visit her bedroom, her favorite spot in the garden, and eventually, with Hannah's assistance, during a brief hospital outdoor session, a quiet corner of the hospital's memorial garden. What are you showing Silver? James asked, watching this peculiar pilgrimage. Important places, Sophie answered simply, offering no further explanation. As Sophie's second round of intensive chemotherapy began, her oncologist presented a measured assessment. She's responding, but not as robustly as we'd hoped. We need to discuss moving to more aggressive protocols. The technical language partially masked the gravity, but both Rebecca and James understood the subtext. Sophie's cancer was proving more resilient than initially expected. Through this intensification of treatment, Silver's presence became even more critical. Hospital exceptions that had begun as temporary accommodations became standardized protocol, and with Silver's specially designed medical support vest earning him recognition throughout the pediatric wing. What had started as one family's unique solution evolved into a formalized integration of animal-assisted therapy for multiple patients, with Silver as the pioneer and model. Doctor. Watson, whose initial scientific curiosity had bloomed into committed advocacy, secured grant funding to study what she termed the silver effect: measurable reductions in anxiety medication requirements, pain perception, and treatment compliance among pediatric patients who interacted regularly with the German Shepherd. What we're documenting here, she explained to hospital administrators, isn't just a heartwarming story. It's a potential paradigm shift in pediatric supportive care for our most vulnerable patients. For Sophie, whose small body weathered storms of cellular warfare and chemical countermeasures, silver remained the constant in an increasingly uncertain journey. On her best days, he was playmate and confidant. On her worst, he was sentinel and comfort. What no one yet realized was that Sophie, with wisdom beyond her years, was preparing Silver for the role he would play after she was gone, a legacy she somehow understood would outlast her physical presence, preserved in recordings, instructions, and the letter still hidden in her special box. As autumn gave way to winter, Sophie's condition began a subtle but undeniable decline that medical intervention seemed increasingly powerless to reverse. Through it all, Silver maintained his vigilant presence, attuned to shifts in her condition, sometimes before monitoring equipment-registered changes. In those quiet hospital room moments, as Sophie slept fitfully under Silver's watchful gaze, the foundations were being laid for an extraordinary demonstration of loyalty, grief, and purpose that would eventually transform not just the Miller family, but an entire community's understanding of the bond between a little girl and the dog who had become her guardian voice, and bridge to a world that had once seemed impenetrably distant. Winter descended on Maplewood with unusual severity. The hospital corridors bustled with holiday decorations that seemed discordantly bright against the reality of Sophie's deteriorating condition. Her 7th month of treatment had brought diminishing returns, the aggressive chemotherapy protocols taking an increasingly harsh toll on her small body while producing less meaningful impact on her cancer. Dr. Watson had begun having difficult conversations with James and Rebecca about quality of life versus continuation of curative efforts, but discussions that left both parents hollow-eyed and silent on their drives home. Through it all, Silver maintained his post. The German Shepherd had developed an almost preternatural sensitivity to Sophie's changing condition, often alerting nurses to subtle shifts in her breathing or comfort levels before monitoring equipment-registered changes. His own health had become a matter of concern for James, who noticed the dog had lost weight despite the carefully prepared meals hospital staff had taken to providing. Silver would often refuse food until physically separated from Sophie's room, and even then would eat only the minimum necessary before anxiously seeking return to her bedside. "He knows," Hannah observed one evening as she adjusted Sophie's IV line. The young nurse had become a fixture in their lives, often volunteering for Sophie's care even when assigned to other patients. "I've seen it before with therapy animals. They sense things we can't." Rebecca, who had taken to sleeping in the recliner beside Sophie's bed, looked up from her laptop where she'd been reviewing Sophie's latest lab results. "What does he know, Hannah?" The nurse hesitated, her hand stilling momentarily. "That things are changing. That she needs him now more than ever." It was the closest anyone had come to acknowledging aloud what the medical charts clearly indicated: Sophie was entering the final phase of her journey. The cancer had proven remarkably resistant to treatment, establishing footholds in new systems despite aggressive intervention. The child who had once raced across the backyard with Silver now required assistance to sit up in bed, her once inquisitive eyes clouded by pain medication and fatigue. Yet, in contradiction to her physical decline, Sophie's communication had become remarkably clear. The little girl who had barely spoken before Silver entered her life now composed complete, thoughtful sentences when her medication allowed clarity. More striking was her apparent comprehension of her situation, a level of awareness that both comforted and devastated her parents. One Thursday evening, during a rare moment of lucidity between pain medication doses, Sophie beckoned her father closer to her bed. Silver, as always, lay pressed against the side of the mattress, his muzzle resting near her hand. "Daddy," she whispered, "I need you to promise something." James leaned in, his heart contracting painfully at the seriousness in his daughter's eyes. "Anything, sweetheart." When I'm gone, Silver will be very sad." She spoke matter-of-factly without fear or confusion. "You have to help him not be alone with the sad." James felt the room tilt slightly, his physician's composure cracking beneath the weight of his daughter's simple wisdom. "Sophie, the doctors are still trying different medications. We're not giving up." She shook her head with unexpected firmness. "I know I'm going away soon. It's okay, Daddy. But Silver doesn't understand like I do." Her small fingers found the shepherd's ear, stroking it with familiar affection. "He'll try to follow me if you don't help him." Rebecca, who had entered the room during this exchange, stood frozen in the doorway, coffee cup halfway to her lips. For months they had carefully couched discussions of Sophie's condition in hopeful terms around her, maintaining the fiction of eventual recovery even as they privately faced increasingly grim prognoses. The revelation that their daughter not only understood her situation but had been preparing for it sent a seismic shock through Rebecca's carefully maintained professional distance. "Sophie," she managed, setting down her cup with unsteady hands. "What makes you think you're going away?" Sophie turned those unnervingly perceptive eyes to her mother. "The doctors talk differently now. They don't say when you get better anymore. They say to make you comfortable. I know what that means." A small, sad smile touched her lips. "It's okay, Mommy. But Silver needs to know it's okay, too." That night, after Sophie had finally drifted to sleep, Rebecca and James stood in the dimly lit hospital corridor, the weight of their daughter's awareness pressing down on them with crushing force. For the first time since Sophie's diagnosis, Rebecca allowed herself to crumble completely, her body folding against James's chest as sobs tore through her professional composure. "She's been preparing all along," Rebecca whispered when she could finally speak. "The recordings, the commands she's been teaching Silver. She's been getting him ready to live without her." James held his wife tightly, his own tears soaking into her hair. "She's 5 years old, Rebecca. No child should have to prepare for their own death." "But she has," Rebecca said. "Our little girl has been braver than either of us." This recognition marked a profound shift in how they approached Sophie's final days. Rather than maintaining the increasingly strained pretense of eventual recovery, they followed their daughter's lead, speaking honestly when she asked questions, allowing her to express fears and wishes without deflection or false reassurance. The medical team, led by Dr. Watson, adjusted their approach as well, focusing more explicitly on comfort and meaningful experience than on aggressive intervention. Hospital policy bent further to accommodate Sophie's deteriorating condition. Silver was permitted to remain overnight, his special medical support vest granting him unprecedented access. The shepherd seemed to understand the gravity of the situation, rarely leaving Sophie's side even for basic necessities. James began bringing Silver's meals directly to the hospital room, placing them where he could eat while maintaining visual contact with Sophie. During one particularly difficult night when pain breakthrough required urgent medication adjustments, Silver positioned himself alongside Sophie's bed, allowing her to bury her face in his fur during the worst moments. Dr. Watson, observing this interaction, noted that Sophie's vital signs stabilized more quickly with Silver's presence than with medication alone. "The physiological impact is measurable," she explained to the attending physician who had questioned the dog's presence during a medical emergency. "Heart rate, respiratory rate, even blood pressure all improve with his contact. At this stage, anything that increases comfort is medically indicated." As Sophie's lucid periods became shorter and less frequent, she continued her preparations with quiet determination. During one such window of clarity, she asked Hannah to help her record additional messages for Silver. For after she explained simply the unspoken remainder of that sentence hanging in the air between them. "Of course, sweetheart," Hannah answered, swallowing against the tightness in her throat as she positioned the tablet to capture Sophie's increasingly frail form propped against hospital pillows. "Silver," Sophie began, her voice thin but determined. "Remember to be brave when I'm gone. Other kids will need you to help them be brave, too." She paused, gathering strength. "And remember our special places. You can visit them to remember me, but you can't stay there forever. That's very important, Silver. Hannah, recording this puzzling directive, caught James's questioning look from the doorway. He had been about to enter but stopped, not wanting to interrupt this moment. Hannah gave a small shrug, equally confused by Sophie's instructions about special places. The answer came the following day when James discovered Sophie showing Silver a photograph of the family plot at Maplewood Cemetery. The Miller family had purchased the space years earlier, a practical decision unrelated to Sophie's illness. The photograph had been taken during a family history project before Sophie's diagnosis, when they'd visited to see the graves of James's parents. "Silver needs to know where I'll be," Sophie explained when James asked about the photograph. "So he can visit but not stay too long." The implications of this statement that Sophie was anticipating Silver mourning at her grave struck James with such force that he had to sit down. The depth of his daughter's understanding and foresight seemed impossible for a child her age, particularly one whose developmental differences had once been characterized as limitations. Rebecca, upon hearing about this interaction, experienced a similar shocked recognition. "She's been preparing him and us all along," she whispered to James that night as they watched Sophie sleep. "How did she understand so much when we've been in denial?" "Maybe because she sees things differently," James suggested, watching Silver's vigilant form at the bedside, without all our adult filters and pretenses. "Or maybe because Silver taught her how to face difficult truths honestly." As December deepened toward winter solstice, Sophie's condition reached its final crisis. The cancer had spread to her central nervous system despite all interventions, causing increased pain and neurological symptoms that even the most aggressive comfort measures struggled to control. The medical team prepared the Millers for the end, suggesting they consider bringing Sophie home for her final days if comfort was the primary goal. "She'd want Silver to be in familiar surroundings, too," Dr. Watson advised gently. "We've done everything medically possible. Now it's about making her remaining time as peaceful as we can." The journey home was carefully orchestrated, an ambulance transport with full monitoring, Hannah accompanying them on her day off to ensure continuity of care, and Silver riding alongside Sophie's stretcher, his body pressed against the side rails to maintain contact even during transit. The Miller home had been transformed in their absence, with a hospital bed installed in the living room facing the large windows overlooking the backyard where Sophie and Silver had once played. Word spread quickly through Maplewood about Sophie's return home. Thomas, their elderly neighbor, appeared on the porch with a carefully prepared meal and a handcrafted wooden music box for Sophie. Mrs. Abernathy, who had once complained about Silver's presence in the neighborhood, arrived with a quilt she had made during Sophie's hospital stay, each square representing a different aspect of Sophie and Silver's story. Sophie's classmates sent drawings and cards, which Hannah arranged on the walls around her bed. And through it all, Silver maintained his position as guardian and companion. When pain medications left Sophie confused and agitated, his presence calmed her more effectively than pharmaceutical interventions. When she experienced moments of clarity, she often used that precious energy to stroke his fur or whisper instructions that only he seemed to understand. On the winter solstice, the longest night of the year, Sophie's breathing pattern changed in a way both Rebecca and James recognized from their medical training. The family gathered close around her bed, Silver positioned alongside her with his head resting near her hand. Hannah, who had been rotating shifts with a hospice nurse, stood quietly in the doorway, bearing witness to the family's final moments together. "I think Silver will need both of you," Sophie whispered, her voice so faint they had to lean close to hear. "Don't be too sad to help him." "We promise, sweetheart," Rebecca answered, her voice breaking on the words. "And don't be mad at each other anymore," Sophie continued, each word clearly requiring tremendous effort. "You're both right sometimes." Despite the crushing grief of the moment, James found himself smiling through tears at this simple wisdom. "We'll remember that, Sophie." Silver, Sophie turned her face toward the shepherd, who lifted his head attentively at the sound of his name. "You have to be brave. Remember everything I told you." The dog whined softly, pressing his muzzle gently against her palm. For a moment, girl and dog gazed at each other with a communication that transcended words, a complete understanding that made the adults in the room feel like intruders on something sacred. Sophie's passing, when it came shortly after midnight, was peaceful, a gentle cessation of breath rather than struggle. Silver, who had maintained his vigilant position throughout, raised his head at the moment her heart stopped.
Yeah.
The low, mournful sound he made, not quite a whine, not quite a howl, gave voice to the grief that had frozen the humans in the room. In the quiet aftermath, as the hospice nurse performed necessary procedures and Hannah helped prepare the room for the funeral home's arrival, Silver remained precisely where he had been during Sophie's final moments. James tried once to coax him away, receiving only a fixed stare in response. It was Rebecca who finally understood. "He needs to stay with her until they take her," she said quietly, "just like he stayed with her through everything else." When the funeral home staff arrived, Silver watched with solemn attention as they transferred Sophie's body. Only after the vehicle had departed did he allow himself to be led outside, where he stood in the moonlit yard, face raised to the stars, and released a howl of such pure anguish that lights came on in neighboring houses. The drive home afterward was silent and surreal, the first time in over a year that James and Rebecca had returned without Sophie. Silver lay in the back seat, uncharacteristically distant, his eyes fixed on some point beyond the car windows. When they arrived home, he moved with mechanical obedience through the front door, but stopped abruptly in the living room where the hospital bed remained. He circled the empty space 3 times, sniffing intently before lying down precisely where Sophie had been. Despite gentle coaxing, treats, and eventually commands, he refused to move from that spot. It was the first indication of the vigil that would soon astonish their community, a demonstration of grief and loyalty so profound it would challenge fundamental assumptions about animal emotion and consciousness. That night, as Rebecca and James collapsed into exhausted sleep in their bedroom, Silver remained in the living room, but his eyes fixed on the empty space where Sophie had completed her journey. Neither of them could have anticipated that by morning he would be gone, beginning a pilgrimage that would transform their understanding of love, loyalty, and the unspoken promise between a little girl and the dog who had become her voice, protector, and most devoted friend. The morning after Sophie's passing broke clear and frigid, with sunlight refracting through ice crystals that had formed on the windows overnight. Rebecca woke first, disoriented by the silence in a house that had once been organized around medical schedules and Sophie's needs. The events of the previous night returned in a crushing wave as she reached reflexively for her phone to check the time. No medications to administer, no vitals to record, no doctors to call. The sudden absence of purpose left her momentarily breathless. "James," she called, her voice sounding foreign in the quiet house. "Silver hasn't been out yet." There was no answering jingle of dog tags or click of nails on hardwood. The absence registered slowly, then with increasing alarm. Rebecca moved through the house, checking Sophie's room first, a space largely untouched during her long hospitalization, then the kitchen, mudroom, and backyard. No sign of the German Shepherd. James joined the search, his face gray with exhaustion and concern. The door was locked. He couldn't have gotten out on his own. A review of their home security system revealed the answer. At 4:17 a.m., Silver had figured out how to work the lever-style door handle with his mouth, letting himself out through the front entrance. The camera showed him standing momentarily on the porch, head raised as if scenting the air, before deliberately moving down the steps and disappearing from view. "He's never done that before," Rebecca said, anxiety rising. Where would he go? The answer came via a phone call from Thomas Harrison, their elderly neighbor. The 78-year-old's voice crackled with emotion. "I'm over at Maplewood Cemetery. Thought I'd come early to pay my respects at the family plot before they bring Sophie. Her dog is already here." James exchanged a stunned look with Rebecca. "That's 3 miles away. How did he?" "He's lying on the Miller plot," Thomas continued. "Won't let me near. Just thought you should know." They drove to the cemetery in tense silence, Rebecca clutching Sophie's old blanket, a potential lure to bring Silver home. The caretaker's truck was parked at the wrought iron gates, its elderly driver waiting with an expression of concern. "Never seen anything like it," the man said by way of greeting. "Showed up at dawn. Knew exactly where he was going, made a beeline for your family plot." Silver's massive form was immediately visible, a dark silhouette against the snow-covered ground. He lay directly atop the space where, in just a few hours, Sophie would be laid to rest. His posture was alert but not aggressive, head up and watching their approach with unwavering attention. "Silver," James called gently, approaching with careful steps. "Come here, boy." The German shepherd didn't growl or show teeth, but his entire body communicated unmistakable intent. He would not be moved. When James came within 10 feet, Silver rose to a standing position, his hackles slightly raised in warning. "He's guarding it," Rebecca whispered. "Like Sophie told him to remember where she would be." The funeral was scheduled for 2 o'clock that afternoon. By 11, the cemetery caretaker was growing visibly anxious. "The ground needs to be prepared," he explained apologetically. "And the dog." "I understand," James said, though in truth he didn't. The situation defied ordinary protocols or solutions. He had tried every command in Silver's training repertoire, offered high-value treats, even attempted to slip a leash around his neck. Each effort was met with the same resolute resistance, not aggression, but absolute refusal. Rebecca placed a hand on his arm. "Let me try." She approached without commands or enticements, simply sitting in the snow near Silver, allowing her grief to show plainly on her face. "I miss her too," she said quietly. "More than I can bear." Silver watched her, his amber eyes reflecting a depth of understanding that seemed impossible for an animal. After a long moment, he shifted slightly closer, allowing Rebecca to place a hand on his back. She felt the tension in his powerful muscles, the slight tremor that ran through his frame. "We need to say goodbye properly," she continued. "The people will be here soon to help us do that. I need you to let them prepare this place for her." For a moment it seemed Silver might relent. He pressed his muzzle briefly against Rebecca's hand in a gesture reminiscent of how he had comforted Sophie during difficult procedures. Then, with deliberate purpose, he settled back onto the exact spot he had been guarding, his message clear: he would not abandon his post. The funeral proceeded with Silver as an unexpected sentinel. The minister, initially concerned about the dog's presence, quickly recognized the appropriateness of his vigil. "Greater love hath no one than this." He quoted during the service, gesturing to the loyal shepherd who remained at attention throughout the proceedings, watching as Sophie's small casket was lowered into the ground. What no one anticipated was that Silver would refuse to leave when the ceremony concluded. As mourners departed and cemetery workers began the final preparations to close the grave, Silver remained immovable, his eyes fixed on the freshly turned earth. James and Rebecca, emotionally exhausted from the day's events, made the difficult decision to return home temporarily, with certain that hunger and fatigue would eventually drive him back to him. The following morning proved this assumption incorrect. Thomas Harrison called at dawn, his voice grave. "He's still there, hasn't moved all night. There was a bad frost, he must be half frozen." This pattern continued for days, then weeks. Silver maintained his position regardless of weather conditions through freezing rain, snow flurries, and bitter cold. His once glossy coat became matted and dull. Despite food and water left by concerned visitors, he ate little, accepting just enough sustenance to maintain his vigil. Local media picked up the story after the second week. The initial coverage, a small feature in the Maplewood Gazette titled "Loyal Dog Refuses to Leave Child's Grave," sparked broader interest. By the third week, regional news vans parked outside the cemetery gates, their presence adding another layer of complexity to an already unprecedented situation. "It's unnatural," insisted Councilman Howard Peters during an emergency town meeting in late January. "We have a health code for a reason. Animals don't belong in a cemetery. especially not living there permanently. "That's not just any animal," countered Hannah, who had continued visiting Silver daily since Sophie's passing. "That's a service animal who lost his person. He's grieving." The town became increasingly divided over the cemetery dog situation, as it was officially termed in municipal discussions. One faction, led by Councilman Peters, advocated for animal control to remove Silver forcibly. "It's for his own good," Peters insisted. "He'll freeze to death out there or starve." The opposing group, which included many families from the hospital's support network, argued passionately for allowing Silver to process his grief without intervention. "You wouldn't force a human being to leave a loved one's graveside," argued Thomas Harrison, who had become an unexpected advocate. "Why do we assume an animal's grief matters less?" Patricia Wilson, the county animal control officer called to assess the situation, found herself in an unprecedented professional dilemma. "Technically, there's no law being broken here," she explained to the increasingly frustrated town council. "The dog isn't dangerous or aggressive. The cemetery is private property, and the owners have granted permission for his presence. My authority to remove him is questionable at best." Throughout these community debates, Rebecca and James continued their daily visits, bringing fresh food and water, but attempting to coax Silver home with increasingly creative strategies. James constructed a sheltered bed beside the grave, hoping Silver might at least accept protection from the elements while maintaining his vigil. Rebecca brought recordings of Sophie's voice, playing them in hopes of luring him away. Nothing worked. Dr. Watson, who visited in her capacity as both medical professional and friend, expressed growing concern about Silver's deteriorating physical condition. "He's lost at least 15 pounds, she noted after observing him from a distance. "And there are signs of exposure damage to his extremities. If this continues much longer, we're looking at potential organ failure." The situation reached critical mass in early February, when temperatures plunged to record lows. Silver, now visibly emaciated despite the community's best efforts to provide nourishment, continued his unwavering vigil through a blizzard that dumped 18 inches of snow on Maplewood. Photographs of the German Shepherd, nearly buried in snowdrifts but refusing to abandon his post, circulated widely on social media, drawing both admiration and concern from far beyond the town's boundaries. James, who had respected Silver's choice despite his growing fears for the dog's health, finally reached his breaking point. "We can't let him die out here," he told Rebecca as they struggled through snowdrifts toward the grave one frigid morning. Sophie wouldn't want that. She specifically told him not to stay forever. "But how do we convince him?" Rebecca asked, watching Silver's labored breathing create small clouds in the freezing air. "We've tried everything." "Not everything," James said grimly, pulling a sedative injection from his pocket, a last resort he had hoped never to use. "I can dart him from here. We'll take him to the clinic, get him stabilized, then figure out next steps." Rebecca's face reflected their shared moral quandary: forced intervention versus respecting Silver's choice. Before she could respond, Thomas Harrison's pickup truck came bouncing down the cemetery's snow-covered lane, the old man driving with uncharacteristic speed. He rolled down his window, face flushed with urgency. "Turn on your radio," he called. "Channel 7 News. They're talking about putting him down, saying it's more humane than letting him suffer. That councilman's pushed through some kind of emergency measure. They're sending a team this afternoon." The threat of forced euthanasia transformed the situation instantly. What had been a private grief observed with respectful distance suddenly became an urgent rescue mission. As the three of them stood in the swirling snow, watching Silver's weakened but determined form, the standoff that had captured a community's imagination approached its inevitable crisis point. Silver's extraordinary demonstration of loyalty had become a direct challenge to human assumptions about animal emotions, rights, and agency, with potentially tragic consequences just hours away. Rebecca stood motionless in the swirling snow, the implications of Thomas's warning sinking in with terrible clarity. Time, which had seemed suspended in the limbo of grief, suddenly compressed into urgent minutes and hours. While James conferred with Thomas about the councilman's emergency order, Rebecca found herself drawn toward Silver, approaching closer than she had dared in weeks. The German shepherd's once magnificent coat hung in dull, matted patches. His ribs showed clearly beneath skin that had lost its elasticity from dehydration and malnutrition. Yet his eyes remained alert, focused, containing an intelligence that seemed to transcend ordinary animal awareness. As Rebecca knelt in the snow before him, maintaining a respectful distance, she was struck by the realization that she had never truly seen Silver as Sophie had, not as a pet or therapy animal, but as an equal soul with his own understanding of love and loss. "I was wrong about you from the beginning," she whispered. "I was so afraid of what might happen that I couldn't see what was actually happening." How you reached her when nothing else could. Silver's ears twitched at the sound of her voice, but his position remained unchanged. Rebecca continued, her professional reserve crumbling completely. "I don't know if you can understand me the way you understood Sophie, but I need you to know that she wouldn't want this. She wouldn't want you to die here." As Rebecca spoke, James approached slowly, the sedative still in his pocket. His expression conveyed the tortured calculus of their situation. Force Silver away to save his life, potentially betraying the dog's autonomy and Sophie's memory, or respect his choice and risk losing him forever. "We need to make a decision," James said quietly. "If the council team comes with euthanasia authorization, we lose all options." Rebecca shook her head, unexpected clarity cutting through her grief fog. "No, there's something we haven't tried, something Sophie would have wanted us to do." She stood abruptly. "We need to go home first. Right now." During the frantic drive home, Rebecca explained her realization. All those recordings Sophie made, she wasn't just preserving memories. She was leaving instructions. She knew this might happen. Their house felt simultaneously foreign and overwhelmingly familiar as they entered, unchanged physically but transformed utterly by Sophie's absence. Rebecca moved with purpose to the special box. That had been returned from the hospital with Sophie's personal effects, still unopened in their grief-stricken haze. Inside, beneath drawings and hospital ID bracelets, lay a sealed envelope with "For Mommy and Daddy, when Silver needs help," written in Sophie's careful hand, assisted by Hannah's steadier penmanship. Rebecca's fingers trembled as she broke the seal, James reading over her shoulder. "Dear Mommy and Daddy, when I have to go away, Silver will be sad. Please don't let him be alone. He needs to help other kids like me. He is good at helping. Don't be mad at each other. I love you both. Love, Sophie." Beneath this message was a second page. "These are Silver's special places. He can visit to remember me, but tell him he can't stay forever. That's very important." Sophie had drawn a crude but recognizable map marking 4 locations: her bedroom, her favorite spot in the garden, the memorial garden at the hospital, and finally the family plot at Maplewood Cemetery. Next to the cemetery drawing were the words, "He can visit but not stay. Remind him about his promise." The promise, James whispered, memory striking with physical force. Before she passed, she made him promise to love others like he loved her. Rebecca continued searching through the box, finding a tablet among Sophie's possessions. When powered on, it contained dozens of video recordings organized by date. The most recent, filmed just days before Sophie's death, showed her propped against hospital pillows, Silver's attentive face beside her. Silver, Sophie's voice was weak but determined. "Remember your promise. You have to help other kids when I'm gone. You can visit my special places to remember me, but you can't stay there forever. That's very important, Silver. Other kids need you to help them be brave, too." Rebecca pressed a hand to her mouth, tears flowing freely. She knew. Somehow she knew exactly what would happen. "She was preparing him and us," James said, his voice breaking. "All along she was getting ready, making sure he would have purpose after she was gone." With renewed urgency, they gathered the tablet, Sophie's favorite blanket, and her well-worn stuffed elephant, the transitional object she had used during difficult hospital procedures. As they prepared to return to the cemetery, Hannah arrived, breathless from rushing. "I just heard about the council order," she explained. "I've been trying to reach you both." Rebecca embraced the young nurse who had become family during Sophie's illness. "Hannah, you helped her write a letter. You knew what she was planning." Hannah's eyes filled with tears. "She made me promise not to tell you until it was time. She said you wouldn't understand until Silver needed it." She looked between them anxiously. "Did it help? The letter?" "We're about to find out," James said, holding up the tablet with Sophie's recordings. When they returned to the cemetery, a small crowd had gathered near the entrance. Thomas Harrison stood like a sentry, his truck positioned to block the narrow access road. Several families from the hospital support group had joined him, along with Dr. Watson and, surprisingly, Principal Henderson from Maplewood Elementary. "The council team is due in 20 minutes, Thomas informed them. That Peters fella called in a veterinarian from the county animal shelter with euthanasia authorization. Rebecca approached the group, no longer the composed professional psychologist, but a mother transformed by grief and revelation. "I need to speak to everyone," she announced, "before they arrive. This has to stop." The crowd parted, revealing a makeshift podium someone had created from cemetery maintenance equipment. Rebecca placed Sophie's tablet on it, hands steady with newfound purpose. "I've been wrong," she began, her voice carrying across the silent gathering. "I've been wrong about Silver from the beginning. I saw him as a complication in Sophie's treatment, then as a tool for her comfort, but never as what he truly was, her voice, her bridge to a world she struggled to navigate." The assembled community members, many who knew Rebecca only as the reserved, skeptical counterpart to James's animal advocacy, listened in stunned silence. "I was a child psychologist before I was Sophie's mother," she continued. "I believed I understood developmental differences, communication barriers, emotional processing. But it took my 5-year-old daughter and her dog to teach me how little I actually knew." She held up the letter, her voice strengthening. "Sophie left this for us. She knew Silver would grieve this way. She prepared for it, recorded messages to help him transition from loving just her to helping other children." Rebecca's professional veneer cracked completely. "My daughter had more wisdom about love and purpose than I've managed to acquire in 40 years of life and practice." The crowd had grown larger as she spoke, now including curious cemetery visitors and local residents drawn by the unusual gathering. Among them stood Councilman Peters, who had arrived ahead of the animal control team. His expression registered conflicted emotions as Rebecca continued. "I'm begging all of you to help us honor Sophie's last wish. She didn't want Silver to die here. She wanted him to have a new purpose, helping other children as he helped her." Rebecca nodded to James, who approached Silver's position with the tablet. For weeks, the German Shepherd had refused all attempts to move him from his post. Now, as James knelt in the snow beside him, Silver's ears pricked forward with familiar attention. "Silver," Sophie's voice emerged from the tablet, thin but clear. The effect on the dog was immediate. His entire body tensed, head turning sharply toward the sound. "Remember your promise. You can visit my special places, but you can't stay forever. Other kids need you too." For the first time in 17 days, Silver shifted his position slightly, nose extending toward the screen where Sophie's face appeared. James, hardly daring to breathe, placed Sophie's blanket and stuffed elephant beside the tablet. "You have to be brave without me," Sophie's recording continued. "That's your most important job now." The gathered crowd watched in stunned silence as Silver rose shakily to his feet, muscles stiff from weeks of near immobility. He pressed his nose against the tablet screen, then to the blanket, inhaling Sophie's lingering scent. A low whine escaped him, the first sound he had made in days. "She's asking you to let go," Rebecca said softly, joining James beside the grave. "Not to forget her, but to honor her by helping others." What happened next would later be described by witnesses in almost reverent terms. Silver lifted his head toward the winter sky and released a howl of such raw emotion that several onlookers wiped away tears. The sound echoed across the cemetery, not the threatening call of a predator, but something that transcended easy classification, communicating grief, acceptance, and farewell in a primal voice that required no translation. When the howl faded, Silver stood motionless for several heartbeats. Then, with deliberate dignity, he stepped away from the grave he had guarded so faithfully. His legs trembled with weakness as he moved toward Rebecca and James, pressing his body against them in a gesture seeking both support and connection. Councilman Peters, who had pushed hardest for intervention, removed his hat as he approached. "I've never," he began, then stopped, searching for words. "I didn't understand what was happening here." "None of us did," Rebecca answered, her hand resting on Silver's bony shoulder. "Except Sophie." Dr. Watson stepped forward, medical authority temporarily setting aside emotional response. "He needs immediate veterinary attention. Rehydration, careful refeeding, treatment for exposure." As James prepared to guide Silver to their waiting vehicle, an unexpected figure approached from the cemetery gates. Maya Lawson, a 7-year-old patient from the oncology ward who had formed a special bond with Silver during Sophie's treatment, they broke away from her mother's grasp and moved directly toward the weakened dog. Like Sophie, Maya had autism spectrum disorder alongside her medical condition, making communication difficult. Maya stopped 3 feet from Silver, her expression solemn. "Sophie said you would help me next," she stated with unexpected clarity, extending her small hand tentatively. "She told me in my dream." Silver, despite his debilitated condition, gently stretched his muzzle toward the child's outstretched fingers. The contact, brief but deliberate, sent a ripple of whispers through the watching crowd. For those who had witnessed Silver's extraordinary bond with Sophie, this moment carried unmistakable significance, not an ending, but a transition, exactly as Sophie had somehow foreseen. As they carefully helped Silver into the waiting vehicle, Rebecca felt a subtle shift in the atmosphere. The tragic tableau of a dying dog at a child's grave had transformed into something else entirely, a continuation of purpose. The fulfillment of a promise made by a wise little girl who understood that love must always find new expressions to survive. Spring arrived in Maplewood with gentle insistence, coaxing pale green shoots from soil that had been frozen solid during Silver's vigil. The transformation of the landscape mirrored the remarkable recovery taking place at the Miller home, where the German Shepherd had slowly regained his strength under James's meticulous veterinary care. The process had been painstaking, carefully calculated refeeding to prevent metabolic collapse, targeted physical therapy to restore muscle loss during his immobility, and specialized treatment for frostbite damage to his extremities. On a mild April morning, Silver stood at the Miller's back door, his posture alert as he surveyed the yard where he and Sophie had once played. Though still leaner than before, his coat had regained its luster, and the distant vacancy had disappeared from his eyes. Rebecca watched him from the kitchen window, struck by how his healing seemed to run parallel to their own. The acute, suffocating grief that had defined their existence in January had gradually given way to a softer sorrow, still present, but no longer all-consuming. "He's ready," James said, joining her at the window. "Dr. Watson called this morning. The rehabilitation center can take him next week for the formal assessment." The Willow Creek Animal Rehabilitation Center specialized in retraining working animals that had experienced trauma or significant life changes. Their director, a former military dog handler named Marcus Winters, had reached out after seeing news coverage of Silver's cemetery vigil. "We've worked with police K-9s transitioning to civilian roles before," he had explained during their initial consultation. "But Silver's case is unique. The bond he formed with Sophie and how he processed her loss suggests exceptional emotional intelligence and adaptability." The specialized nature of the center had appealed to both Millers, though for different reasons. James saw the technical expertise necessary to refine Silver's natural abilities, while Rebecca recognized the psychological understanding required to honor what Silver had experienced. I keep thinking about Sophie's letter, Rebecca said now, watching Silver methodically patrol the perimeter of the yard. She knew he'd need a new purpose. Somehow she understood that better than either of us. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Maya Lawson and her mother. The 7-year-old's oncology treatments had been successful, allowing her to enter remission 3 months earlier, though she continued regular follow-up appointments. Like Sophie, Maya navigated the world with autism's complex challenges alongside her medical journey. Since their unexpected cemetery encounter, Maya had visited Silver twice weekly during his recovery. These structured interactions had proven beneficial for both, Silver responding to the familiar rhythms of supporting a child with sensory processing differences, and Maya finding in him the unconditional acceptance that made communication less daunting. He remembers the commands Sophie taught him, Maya observed in her characteristic direct manner as Silver performed the pressure therapy technique he had once used to calm Sophie during overwhelming moments. The German Shepherd positioned himself against Maya's side, providing steady, grounding contact without overwhelming her. He does, Rebecca agreed, watching the interaction with professional interest layered beneath personal emotion. But he's learning new ones with you too. This was true in ways that continued to surprise them. Silver had begun responding to Maya's unique communication style, recognizing subtle cues in her body language that even her parents sometimes missed. When sensory overload approached, Silver would guide her to quieter spaces without command. When anxiety manifested as repetitive movements, he would interrupt gently with a nudge or lean. Rebecca had begun documenting these interventions systematically, her psychologist training merging with her newfound appreciation for animal-assisted therapy. The notebook she kept the Silver protocol. She called it had expanded to include observations from Maya's mother and teachers, alongside James's behavioral notes. As Maya worked with Silver in the yard, following the structured activity plan Rebecca had developed, a car pulled into the driveway. Hannah emerged, now a regular visitor, despite no longer being Sophie's nurse. She carried a large folder tucked under her arm. The hospital board approved it, she announced without preamble, her face flushed with excitement. The full pilot program, 6 trained therapy dogs for the pediatric oncology ward with Silver as the model. Dr. Watson practically danced when they voted. The Silver program, as it had informally been named, had evolved from Dr. Watson's research during Sophie's treatment. The hospital's initial reluctance toward animals in medical settings had gradually yielded to the compelling evidence she had gathered, co-bolstered by the remarkable outcomes observed with Silver. The final proposal, co-authored by Dr. Watson, James, and Rebecca Poe, outlined a comprehensive integration of specially trained therapy animals into treatment protocols for children with dual diagnoses, developmental differences alongside serious medical conditions. There's more, Hannah continued, opening the folder to reveal official-looking documents. The foundation wants to fund a dedicated training facility. They're suggesting the vacant Johnson property adjacent to the hospital grounds. The Johnson property, 3 acres with a modest house that had remained unoccupied since its donation to the hospital 5 years earlier, represented an unexpected but perfect solution to the question that had lingered in their planning. Where would the program be based? They want to name it after Sophie, Hannah added softly. The Sophie Miller Center for Integrative Therapy. They're asking if you'd both consider serving as founding directors. Rebecca and James exchanged a glance laden with complex emotion. The prospect offered purpose arising from their devastating loss, exactly what Sophie had tried to secure for Silver through her careful preparations. We would need to formalize Silver's training credentials first, James said thoughtfully. Establish the protocols and measurable outcomes that would make this more than just a heartwarming story. Rebecca nodded, her mind already cataloging the research, design, and assessment tools required. We'd need to demonstrate scalability and consistent results across different handler animal teams. Hannah smiled at their simultaneous shift into professional planning mode. I think Sophie would approve of you applying rigorous standards to her intuitive understanding. The conversation continued inside, where Maya joined them after completing her session with Silver. As the adults discussed logistics and timeline, the child listened with unexpected attentiveness. When a natural pause occurred, she spoke with characteristic directness. Sophie told Silver to help other kids. Now he's teaching other dogs to help too. Her simple summary cut through the complex planning to the essential truth of their undertaking. 2 weeks later, Silver began his formal assessment at Willow Creek. The specialized facility, nestled among rolling hills 30 miles outside Maplewood, provided both the professional expertise and peaceful environment necessary for his transition. Marcus Winters, impressed by Silver's natural abilities, advocated for an accelerated, customized program. Most service animals are trained from puppyhood, he explained during their weekly update meeting. Silver is different. He's essentially self-taught through his work with Sophie, which means he's created his own problem-solving approaches rather than following standardized protocols. This unorthodox learning pattern presented both challenges and opportunities. Silver excelled at intuitive responses to emotional distress, but needed refinement in consistent command structures that would allow him to work with handlers other than the Millers. The Rehabilitation Center developed a specialized program that honored his existing skills while building the formal framework necessary for certification. Throughout Silver's training period, Rebecca immersed herself in the emerging field of animal-assisted interventions for children with developmental differences. Her professional reputation, initially built on conventional therapeutic approaches, underwent a remarkable transformation as she integrated her first-hand observations with rigorous research methodology. The journal article she co-authored with Dr. Watson Beyond Companionship, The Measurable Outcomes of Canine-Assisted Therapy in Pediatric Dual Diagnosis Patients, gained unexpected traction in both veterinary and psychological publications. James, meanwhile, worked closely with Marcus Winters to develop standardized training protocols that could be replicated with other dogs. His veterinary practice gradually shifted focus, incorporating more behavioral work alongside traditional medical care. The Sophie and Silver protocol they developed emphasized the bidirectional nature of the therapeutic relationship, recognizing that the animal was not merely a tool for human healing but an active participant in a mutually beneficial exchange. By midsummer, Silver had completed his formal certification requirements, and achievements celebrated with a small ceremony at Willow Creek. Maya was invited to accept his graduation certificate, a gesture that acknowledged her role in his rehabilitation and transition. As the 7-year-old solemnly attached the official therapy dog vest to Silver's harness, Rebecca was struck by how perfectly Sophie's vision had unfolded, not as a replacement for what was lost, but as an evolution of purpose that honored their shared journey. The Sophie Miller Center for Integrative Therapy officially opened its doors in September. The renovated Johnson property had been transformed into a welcoming space where medical support, psychological services, and animal-assisted interventions converged. Photographs of Sophie and Silver during her treatment adorned the entrance hallway, alongside Sophie's letter, preserved under glass as a mission statement more powerful than any professionally crafted alternative. Silver, now officially designated as the program's lead therapy dog and training model, approached his new role with the same steadfast dedication he had shown throughout his journey. His work with Maya continued as a formal case study, while he began supervised interactions with new children entering the program. Most remarkably, he displayed an unexpected talent for helping train the other dogs being prepared for similar roles. He's teaching by example. Marcus observed during a training session where Silver demonstrated the subtle positioning that provided optimal pressure therapy for a child experiencing sensory overload. "I've never seen anything quite like it," he models the behavior for the younger dogs in a way they understand instantly. The program's impact extended far beyond Maplewood. Inquiries arrived from hospitals and treatment centers across the country, each seeking guidance on implementing similar integrated approaches. The research data, meticulously gathered and analyzed by Rebecca and Dr. Watson, provided the empirical foundation necessary for broader adoption. On the anniversary of Sophie's passing, Rebecca and James brought Silver to Maplewood Cemetery not in crisis or desperation, but in peaceful remembrance. The German shepherd carried a small bundle of fresh flowers in his mouth, placing them gently on the grave with a dignity that brought tears to the eyes of cemetery visitors who recognized him from the previous year's vigil. Unlike his earlier refusal to leave, Silver now sat quietly beside the headstone for exactly 10 minutes, the duration Rebecca had carefully trained for these memorial visits. When James gave the quiet command, "Time to help others now," Silver rose without hesitation, giving the grave a final glance before walking steadily between his human companions toward the waiting car. What began as Sophie's intuitive understanding of Silver's needs had expanded into something more profound. The Sophie and Silver Act, a state legislative initiative addressing service animal access in schools and treatment facilities, was scheduled for its first committee hearing the following month. Principal Henderson, once hesitant about Silver's presence at Maplewood Elementary, had become one of the bill's most vocal advocates after witnessing the program's success with several of his students. The community transformation extended to unexpected quarters. Councilman Peters, who had once pushed for Silver's forced removal from the cemetery, became a regular volunteer at the center. "My grandson was diagnosed with autism last year," he explained simply when asked about his change of heart. "Seeing what these dogs can do, how they bridge worlds we thought were unbridgeable, it changes your perspective on everything." As Silver entered his 8th year, gray beginning to frost his muzzle, his daily schedule remained full. Mornings typically found him at the center, working with children and training younger dogs. Afternoons often included visits to the hospital where Sophie had spent so much of her brief life. Evenings belonged to the Miller home, where he continued to be not just a working animal but a beloved family member who had helped them rebuild their lives around a loss that would never fully heal but had somehow become bearable. On Silver's birthday, a special celebration was held at the center. Children from the program presented him with handmade cards and appropriate treats. Maya, now 9 and thriving both medically and developmentally, had prepared a special photograph album documenting Silver's journey from police dog to grieving guardian to healing pioneer. The final page held a simple drawing of Sophie Silver and all the children he had subsequently helped, gathered beneath a rainbow arch. Beneath the drawing, in Maya's careful handwriting, where the word Silver had helped her find the courage to speak aloud, Sophie was right. Love doesn't go away when someone leaves. It finds new places to grow. As Rebecca watched Silver accept the children's affection with dignified patience, his gray muzzle and gentle eyes reflecting the wisdom of his extraordinary journey, she recognized the truth in those simple words. Through Silver, Sophie's legacy continued not as a painful absence but as an ongoing presence that transformed lives far beyond their small family circle. The promise made between a little girl and her loyal companion had not merely been kept but magnified, creating ripples of healing that continued to expand in ways none of them could have imagined during those dark days of grief. In life's twilight years, we recognize that true bonds transcend all boundaries, even those between species, between ability and disability, between life and death. Sophie and Silver's journey reminds us that wisdom often comes from the most unexpected sources, a child who understood that love must find new purpose to survive, and a loyal companion who demonstrated grief more profound than many humans allow themselves to express. Perhaps in our later years, we too face the challenge of reimagining purpose after loss. Like Silver at the cemetery, we may find ourselves guarding memories so fiercely that we risk losing our future. Sophie's gentle wisdom offers us all a precious truth. Honoring those we've lost means carrying their love forward, not remaining frozen in grief. The greatest tribute to those who've left us isn't endless mourning, but finding new ways to share the love they gave us. In Silver's transformation from grieving sentinel to healing pioneer, we find a powerful metaphor for our own journeys through loss toward renewed purpose and connection. I hope you enjoyed today's story. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more stories like this. Leave a like and comment below what you thought of the story. See you in the next video.